It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Look at that, Dwain. What are we doing with our lives? Well, really, what am I doing with my life? You're obviously working for multiple sites here. Man, that was impressive. So again, folks, if you want, go over to Amazon, help them out. Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics. We're going to give 2 copies away. What you need to do is subscribe to our YouTube page. Okay. We always beat you over the head with that. Go to YouTube, search Fantasy Football Hustle, subscribe, send us that screenshot on Twitter at FF Hustle. We're going to pick a couple of people and send you a free copy of Reese's book. All right, folks, here we go. Dwain's in the house. I'm here. We're ready to talk about what happens at the end of the first round. You've got maybe the 10th, 11th, 12th pick. All these running backs are flying off the board. You want to get into the game. You want a running back. Let's talk about who's going to be there. You want to go maybe running back. That's kind of going to be our focus today. And the first guy we want to talk about, Dwain, at the turn is Derrick Henry. Last year, RB3 for the Tennessee Titans. He's coming off the board, according to Fantasy Pros ADP, as running back 6 with an ADP of 7.3. You see what he did last year, just a monster season, 16 touchdowns, over 300 attempts, averaged 20 fantasy points per game. Really was an unstoppable force when the game script helped or was in the favor of the Tennessee Titans. So we hope you guys enjoy what we're doing here on YouTube. We have a new guy, Corey Hitpiss. He is our director of Hustle Analytics. Every week we're going to change his title, but follow him at Corey_Hitpiss. That is at COREY_HIETPAS. We've tweeted it out over at FF Hustle, but he's doing a fantastic job joining the team. Really excited to have him, and he's going to bring to life a lot of Dwain's data and utilization reports, and we hope you enjoy it here on the YouTube channel. So, all right, Dwain, let's dive in. Let's show off some of these fancy stats and things that PFF's given you. Let's talk about Derrick Henry.
Yeah, we'll start with Henry. We'll go in order of ADP. So, Henry's the next back going off the board after Dalvin Cook. Pretty much that's the consensus. Top 5 is if you think about Cook, and then you've got Kamara, Zeke Elliott, Barkley, and then CMC. And so then usually Michael Thomas sneaks in there, and that's what puts, Henry on average at pick 7 in the first round. And so last year, he played 15 games. You've already hit his stats and everything, but I just thought I'd give a quick outline to everybody. So you already talked about the 20 points per game. Mm-hmm. So he was actually an RB1, which if you look at last year in PPR scoring, if you look at it by average, the RB1 through RB 12, he scored. You needed to score over 25 or at least 25 points, per game. And so 7 of 15 games played, he hit the 47%. If you think of RB2, which is 14 to 24 points, 3 of 15 games. So between those two, 67% of the time, he was at least an RB2. Now he had 33% of the games that he was under, an RB2. And so what we're going to do is just break down a little bit. And I'm not going to stay on this screen long because this is literally 4 different screens that we're bringing together. But I'm going to kind of walk you guys through what these things mean, what you're looking for. But thanks again to Corey for helping us pull this together. But all the stuff you're used to seeing or us talking about in the utilization reports, we're really just trying to bring it to life with some visuals to help you guys be able to get into it a little bit more. If you're on YouTube and you're on Periscope, you're watching, rather than just watching Brian and I talk, you can actually see some of this stuff. So we're going to start again, with the fantasy points, and you can see, each time, he was above and each time he was a below. But what I also did up at the top, so down at the bottom, you've got the weeks. Over here, you've got the points. These dotted lines are those averages we talked about. These are his fantasy points. So up at the top, I added one other thing. I added the percent of time that Tennessee dropped back in those weeks. Because if you think about it and you look at Henry over the first few weeks or several weeks, out of the gate, week 1, he had a 75-yard touchdown reception. He had a touchdown rushing. Everything seemed great, even though the usage wasn't, huge. But then, down to 17, not bad. But then all of a sudden, 11, 12, 14, a 4. He kind of comes back with an 18, then a 9. You're not feeling so great about Derrick Henry, right? Come week 8 after you've had several weeks like that. So what you'll notice is up top, where you see these reds. So 65% of the time they drop back in week 2. Well, notice 71% of the time in week 3, that was bad. 70% of the time in week 6, Derrick Henry only scored 4 points. 64% of the time in week 8, he only scored 9 points. 72% of the dropbacks, he actually did get some touchdowns in week 9. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But then again, over here, as you get to week 15, he didn't play week 16. So 61% drop back rate, and he only scored 9 points. So what you can see is when Tennessee is forced to pass the ball more, Derrick Henry becomes less reliable. We actually talked about that on the show. But what really did it for him at the end of the year last year is look at these favorable game scripts where they're dropping back to pass 51%, 42%, 50%, 49%, right? If you think about dropbacks, you're used to hearing about attempts. Like attempts, a high number is 60%, but for dropbacks, a high number is, 70%. So 50% when you're talking about dropbacks and not attempts is really low. 50% would be low even if you're talking about attempts. But remember, dropbacks is anytime you drop back and the quarterback scrambled, you drop back, the quarterback got sacked, or you actually drop back to, pass the ball. So it's a better look at how often teams pass versus run. And so you can see that was the problem. So what we want to look at is, okay, what do we think, about those particular weeks? We'll break it down just into the individual buckets. And so you'll see, again, I put these numbers up here at the top. Notice the snaps down at 51%, 47%. Every time that red number pops up, 55%. Where's that at? So the other thing we did is we overlaid what's the average snap percentage that these runners get, an RB1 and RB2 and RB3. And you'll notice whenever they're in these game scripts that are working, his numbers are well up over what an RB1 would be. And the average for an RB1, 1 through 12 in a 12-man league is 68%. An RB2 is at least 55%. And you'll notice those things correlate directly with the way the games are working out. And so it's not like this is rocket science. I wanted to start with Henry too, because a lot of people know this about Henry. So it makes sense when you see it. Some of these other guys we're going to look at, people are going to be like, whoa, I didn't know that about that player. So it's really a good setup. But this is a nice way to think about it. Look at these, when they go to more pass heavy, I mean, he's down here on the range of this RB3, which is exactly, if I go back, that's what happened to him. That's what happened to him from a fantasy point standpoint. All right, the next layer. Now, this one we're definitely gonna have to change. So you guys can feel welcome to give feedback in the chat room. This is an iterative process that we're going through with Corey. So I'm basically working through the utilization report. I'm telling him the data that I want to visualize, and we're trying to figure out how we best do it. And this is one when he and I met this week to follow back up on what he had done. We knew that we've got work to do on this chart. It's too busy. So hang with me for a minute. We're going to work on it. But again, you've just got your weeks across the top. And here you see he actually put in week 18 for the playoffs, the playoff game. But the blue bar is the percentage of rush attempts inside the 5 that Derrick Henry had for the team that week. So Derrick Henry on the season for the Titans had 79% of their carries inside the 5. That's really, really good. Okay. You'll notice right here, the average for a running back 1 is 66% of the carries inside the 5 for their team, and RB2 is 44%. Okay. This orange bar is the percentage of the team total rushes for the week. Okay. Again, these orange bars, this is where it gets a little confusing. These dotted lines you'll see over here, the average running back 1 rushes the ball 60% of the time, and RB2 gets 45% of the rushing attempts. Okay. Across, and this is for last year, across all weeks, over 17 weeks of play. So the first 3 weeks, Henry was getting those rushing attempts inside the 5. And he was actually able, if we go back and look, he staved off, right, a complete drop-off in week 2, despite the 65%. So he kind of got lucky. He didn't have that many rushing attempts that week, but he did manage to get all the carries inside, and he did score inside the 5, and he scored. So that kind of held things off. In week 3, he got all the carries inside the 5, but he didn't get a touchdown. And then that's when you saw his points drop below. But you'll notice if you look across, anytime you see the 0% at the bottom, that means the team actually did have attempts inside the 5, but the player we're talking about didn't have one of those. If you just see a blank, that means no rushes inside the 5 period for that team that week. So what you'll notice with Henry, the good news is he gets high leverage snaps inside the 5. That's really good. He also averages 72% of the carries. And notice, even in the weeks where he did bad, he was still getting over RB1 numbers as far as the rushing attempts. The problem was the pie shrunk on him. So all of a sudden, if you're dropping back to pass 71% of the time, how often, Drake, you're Mr. Math guy, how many times are you actually running the ball now? 29%. That's not good. So even if you're at 70%, but it's only 30%, I mean, if you're at 70%, right, of the carries, but only 30% of the plays for the weaker runs, then this can be a little bit misleading. That's the other reason we're kind of trying to think about, okay, how do we maybe visualize this one a little bit better? And we're thinking about actually using raw carry numbers. So Corey and I are working through that. So again, you guys feel free to give feedback, but the high level takeaway here is you definitely have high leverage touches from inside the 5. That's a plus for Henry. He is the lead carrier or ball carrier in the offense. So that's a positive. It's just when the pie shrinks on him, it's problematic. So lastly, you guys hear us talk about this a lot. We always get a ton of great feedback. So it's the final chart we'll look at for Henry. But this is actually, again, you across the bottom, you see the weeks. And over here on the left, you've got routes run per drop back. And you've also got targets, right? So you got your average for target share, RB2, RB1. And then you've got your averages for RB1, RB2 for your routes per drop back. Actually, like this one was kind of how we more planned the one you just looked at to look like. This one's a lot cleaner. It's easier. So we're trying to come up with something more like this. But so for example, what you'll see is with Henry, if you're thinking about, from an RB2, RB1, as far as routes ran per drop back, notice how he's always down here below this line. He gets up above it here, but he's usually below the line for an RB2, occasionally above the line for an RB1. And what you'll note, and we'll talk about this on another player here in a minute, but this spike week for sure was a week where they actually blew out, the other team. So they just didn't go to their other packages, as much. So Dion Lewis just wasn't on the field in that blowout situation. But whenever you're consistently below down here in your routes ran per drop back, you're also going to typically there's a correlation with how often you're actually going to be targeted. And you'll notice he never got above an RB1 status as far as targets. And he had 3 weeks where he was a 0. And then you got these 3%er weeks. So that's the big question with Derrick Henry. And so as we think about Henry this year, going round 1, pick 7, on one hand, you can say, I get it, because you've got Dion Lewis gone. So if Darrington Evans doesn't get the nod as the pass receiver, which is a real possibility because he may not be able to pass block, and that's always a problem for rookie runners. He could either be one of two things. Evans either locks down the role as just a change of pace guy, which just means every third or fourth series he gives Henry a breather. That's fine. But if he starts taking over those passing snaps like what Dion Lewis used to do, that's going to be a problem for Henry. So my outlook on Henry right now, and I took him 7th overall in an FFPC draft 2 weeks ago, and I was fine with it. Because right now I'm betting on him being the guy that's actually going to see an uptick in his routes ran per drop back, as well as, his target share. And I'm betting on him over Darrington Evans being ready, with Evans coming from a smaller school. We're not going to have we don't have all the mini camps. We're probably going to have, issues all the way through training camp. Sounds like we may not even get any games now. They're still saying 2, but be prepared for 1 or 0. So a lot of things that go into getting these players ready are going to be a little bit different. And so for me, there is clear upside with Henry, because if he does tack on an extra 3 to 4%, 5% of target streak, he could easily be the number 1 runner. He was already number 3. Now you got to expect some touchdown regression, because you pointed out how many touchdowns he ran for. The good news is not only does he get a lot of carries inside the 5, he's really good at it. He's really efficient at it. So it's not like the team just had an exorbitant amount of carries inside the 5 that we couldn't really reproject for a team. Their carries inside the 5 as a team is something we could reproject again this year. He just needs to remain efficient. Now, he also had several long plays last year, and we can't count on all of those again. So I think Henry's going to be due for a little bit of regression in the touchdowns. But if he can take over in the receiving area, then he could warrant, his ADP. But if we see Evans sneaking in, then that's when we got to start. If we start reading that Evans is going to take that role, we've got to back away. At that point, Derrick Henry becomes overpriced. And I think he'd be more likely to be somebody you'd want in the 2nd round, because you're just betting too much on, outcomes that probably aren't repeatable.
And for some people out there, they might say, oh, Derrick Henry, there's no way he's going to fall to me at the end of the 1st round. I did a best ball draft with Graham Barfield and some guys over at Fantasy Points. I had the 112. I got Derrick Henry. So it absolutely can happen. And there were smart people in that draft.